Well, folks, President Trump's Save America Act has a deadline, and Senator John Thune, he may be slow walking this, hoping it will stall into August recess. Now, the Senate returns on July 27th, and their state work period clock starts on August 10th, meaning they'll be gone. Now, Republican leadership has 14 days to produce a success path. And there are 6 gates that are going to decide whether this bill lives or dies. Funding, 50 votes, Senate pressure, the 60-vote wall, reconciliation text, and the Byrd Rule. And at that final gate, President Trump has a secret weapon that's sitting in JD Vance's chair. Now, we all know that Fox reported Senator Thune plans to hold the House budget framework until the Senate moves a continuing resolution to keep the government open. And when Fox asked what was holding up SAVE, Thune said, "We got to get to 50. Now, that number matters, okay? Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, sponsored 3752, the standalone Save America Act, and it has 47 current Republican co-sponsors. And Mike Lee and 48 Republican senators have already put their names on SAVE. John Thune is one of them, okay? Co-sponsoring the bill is not a commitment, though, because every reconciliation act needs a little bit more. Okay, but the starting point count is 48 names, not 0. So, who are the 2 holdouts? Well, that is the first receipt we need on Monday. The House passed the original SAVE Act, H.R. 22, by 220 to 208. The expanded Save America Act now exists as a public House and Senate text, and Trump made it a priority. They even have James Carville telling Democrats to stop fighting this. Stop fighting voter ID. Fox reported him citing polling around 75%. Now, if Democrats remain the opposition, which isn't true, but the live question now is whether the Senate Republicans will try to use procedure to move the bill or use the procedure to bury it. Gate 1 is government funding. The Senate comes back at 3 p.m. on Monday. Yeah, they get to come to work that late. Okay. The first listed vote is cloture on a nomination at 5:30. And Thune has also filed cloture on the SEED Act. So the calendar is already filling up. Government funding matters. A shutdown would be a failure, and funding has to move. But these negotiations do not prevent staff from drafting SAVE language, senators from counting votes, or committees from reviewing the jurisdiction, or the White House from demanding a date. Those tracks can run at the same time. So the test on this is simple. Does Thune name the SAVE path? Does he do so while he moves the funding extension? Or does funding first become an open-ended delay? Because he might be looking for an excuse. Now, that report establishes the delay. It does not establish any procedural reason the 2 tracks can't run in parallel. Gate 2 is the 50-vote budget resolution. The House passed the concurrent resolution 113 on July 22nd. Okay? That is a concurrent budget resolution. It does not go to President Trump, though. Not for a signature, not yet. The House and Senate must adopt the same resolution before its reconciliation instructions would take effect. So if the Senate changes it, the House has to agree to those changes. The Senate can't filibuster the motion to proceed to a budget resolution. Debate is limited, and adoption is a majority vote question. That is why Thune's "we got to get to 50" answer matters. The first Senate deliverable is a path to adoption of the framework, a date, the text the Senate wants, and the Republican votes to pass it. President Trump cannot schedule this himself. What he can do is demand that Thune publish the path and identify which Republicans are not committing. Now, Gate 3 is pressure from other senators. Mike Lee is not powerless because he's not the majority leader. Neither are the other 47 Republican co-sponsors who joined this bill. Okay, they can demand a conference meeting. They can publish letters. They can make the whip count publicly. Okay, once the budget resolution reaches the floor, they can offer amendments and forced recorded positions. They can also refuse to let Thune describe this as a vague process problem. If the obstacle is 2 Republican votes, they can demand the names. What they cannot do by themselves is control the floor schedule. The majority leader still decides what gets floor time. Their power is pressure, amendments, visibility, and the cost they can impose on a quiet delay. Thune's power is scheduling, so we should watch what each of them does with the power that they actually have. Like Gate 4 is the normal 60-vote wall. Under normal Senate rules, ending debate on legislation takes 3/5 of senators duly chosen and sworn. In the modern Senate, that usually means 60 votes. JD Vance can't fix that with a tiebreaker. The vice president can break a tie in the Senate, and that matters when the vote is 50-50. But a tiebreaker does not turn 51 into 60. So if the Save America Act moves as ordinary legislation, Thune either needs Democratic votes or he needs to make Democrats own the filibuster in public. President Trump can make Democrats own that filibuster. He can demand a vote and make every senator go on record. But if Thune does not have 60, the live partisan path is reconciliation. So Gate 5 is the reconciliation text before recess. The standalone Save America Act text is public. It amends the National Voter Registration Act to require proof of citizenship to register to vote for federal elections. It also requires an eligible photo ID to vote in federal elections. The House budget resolution text is also public, and it's much narrower. Okay, that resolution does not contain the final SAVE implementation language. It tells the House Administration Committee to submit changes in laws within each of its jurisdictions no later than September 11th. Now, the question is, what do they actually draft under that $10 billion instruction? If they just paste the full Save America Act mandate into reconciliation and say the money makes it budgetary, Democrats are going to challenge it as policy dressed up as spending. And that statute, well, we've heard it before, the one that recognizes changing the terms and conditions under which federal money is spent. Yeah, that means grants, funding conditions, enforcement funding, and implementation money are possible drafting tools. But a budget effect is not automatically enough. That effect is merely incidental to the policy. The provision is still vulnerable. So we have to read the language before anybody claims it survives. They do not tell us the Byrd Rule is the obstacle before showing us the text. And they have to show the public what's mandatory, what's incentive-based, what's tied to federal dollars, and what is just policy language hoping nobody notices. And Gate 6 is where the Byrd Rule, and this is where Trump's secret weapon finally becomes real. The Byrd Rule is not a self-enforcing rule, okay? The senator has to raise a point of order against the provision. The Senate parliamentarian advises the presiding officer. Parliamentarian does not cast a vote and does not issue the formal ruling from their chair. Presiding officer decides whether to sustain all, some, or none of the challenged provisions. And JD Vance is the president of the Senate. He can sit in that chair. That's the secret weapon. If you want the Senate fight tracked with names, dates, and receipts, hit the hype button on this video, okay? So no more people see it before August recess. And subscribe. Now, if Vance rules that a challenge provision stays, a senator can appeal his ruling. A CRS says a successful appeal on the Byrd Rule requires 3/5 of all senators, normally 60 votes. A senator can also move to waive the Byrd Rule before the chair rules, but that also requires 60. So Vance can't create 60 votes. He can't turn ordinary legislation into reconciliation, can't rescue the text that nobody drafted, can't fix a budget resolution that never passed on a floor fight that Thune never scheduled. But parliamentarians' advice is not the final constitutional act. The ruling belongs to the chair, and an appeal carries its own 60-vote burden. That is real leverage, and most of the public's discussion stops before it gets there. It's also why the first 5 gates still matter. The Vance option only exists if Republicans do the work that's required to put this reconciliation text on the Senate floor. Now, let's bring the entire timeline together. Okay, the Senate tentative schedule, it lists August 10th through September 11th as state work period. That means they will be on their recess. The resolution uses September 11th as the House committee submission deadline. August 10th, not a legal expiration date for the Save America Act. It's the political deadline that's in front of us. If Republicans leave Washington without a Senate path, public whip count, and draft language, momentum will disappear while the technical deadline keeps moving. Now, President Trump has a role at every point. He can demand that funding and SAVE move in parallel. He can force the 2 missing Republican votes into public. He can make Democrats own the 60-vote filibuster. He can demand that reconciliation text before recess. He can make sure JD Vance is ready if a Byrd Rule point of order were to reach the chair. What Trump cannot do is schedule the Senate floor, can't adopt the budget resolution for Congress, or write House Administration Committee's text himself. That's why leadership exists. If this starts looking like another Senate stall, I think Trump is going to make it very uncomfortable for the people who are trying to bury it quietly. And he should. The barriers are procedural and specific. 60-vote cloture, the Byrd Rule, and a Senate calendar that reaches August 10th. This is why the public needs receipts instead of another speech about election integrity. So starting Monday, we need 4 things from Republican leadership: a date, a vote count, the reconciliation text, and a clear plan for the chair when and if the Byrd Rule hits. Thune is already a co-sponsor. There are already 48 Republican names on the Senate bill, and there are 14 days before state work period begins. Trump already did the hard political part. He put Save America in the center of the table and gave Republicans the cover to fight it. Now leadership has to do the work. They have to count the votes, write the language, name the holdouts, move the bill. If Republicans leave without those receipts, the Senate calendar will have done what Democrats could not do, not on their own merits. And that can't happen quietly. Not this time. Oh, and the secret weapon. The president has the power to call Senate back from their leave or recess. If you didn't know that, now you know. And let's not for a second believe that President Trump wouldn't do that.
Is that JR? Yes. But we love you, JR. Thank you very much. Thank you, man. This guy, he's a genius. Thank you, JR. Really nice.